how can you say I love movies if you don't
Haven't seen any.
know them?
Right.
Yeah. That's
Right.
like saying I love a person you have a crush on who's never met you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you have to dive into this. You have to really love it
Yeah.
if you want to be a part of it. I mean, Quentin was already such an aficionado before
Yeah.
he ever did rolled 1 inch of film. He had already seen a zillion films. I had too. I think a lot of the people that I run with come from that school of, we love movies for real. We're not kidding,
Filmmakers make films, but films make filmmakers. From blockbuster premieres to grindhouse theaters, late night cable to the local video store, there is no greater classroom for aspiring filmmakers than cinema itself. Join your host, Eric Skwarczynski, as he dives deep into the minds of legendary directors, producers, actors, and more to discover their biggest influences and to explore the impact their films are leaving behind. This is Film School. Grab your popcorn. Class is about to begin.
Welcome back to the Film School podcast. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Laura Cayouette. She's perhaps best known for her role as Leonardo DiCaprio's sister in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, but she's also acted in 45 other films, including Now You See Me, Kill Bill, and Enemy of the State. Her television appearances include True Detective, Friends, and a recurring role on Queen Sugar. Laura's also earned a master's degree in creative writing and English literature at the University of South Alabama, where she was awarded Distinguished Alumni in 2014. She currently resides in New Orleans, where she is writing actively and still performing regularly. And Laura is an absolutely phenomenal actress and a great guest. We talk about so many incredible things, from how she felt called to be an actor, what the process looks like, both practically and philosophically. At the end of the discussion, we talk a little bit about the Harvey Weinstein arrest and what effect that had on the industry, the Me Too movement, and so on and so forth. As someone who acted in several Tarantino films, that means she also worked with Harvey Weinstein very often. So I got her kind of response to that situation, and we had a lot of conversation about how Hollywood can do better when it comes to protecting young men and women in the industry. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Laura Cayouette. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Film School podcast. Laura, thank you so much for making the time to do this today.
I'm very glad to be here.
I know we talked a little bit beforehand. This show, I really love talking about the movies that made the people who are making movies, like the inspirations, the people that really just inspired and fueled another generation of filmmakers. Who were some of the biggest influences that you remember watching at an early age that kind of sparked that creative juice to say, I want to do this?
I never had that experience. I never dreamed of being an actor when I was a child. I didn't actually understand that it was a job or a career or anything. Like, I would watch I Dream of Jeannie. It never occurred to me that they were getting paid to do all that, running around and playing in costumes and all that. I grew up in a government town and people worked for the government.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that was a job. I knew you could be a teacher or you could work for the government.
Right. So, was it something that you were, I mean, obviously you enjoyed watching movies.
I had favorite actors. Like when I was a kid, Haley Mills, oh my gosh, Disney movies, Haley Mills, I was cuckoo for. And, I was a huge fan of Vivian Lee's role and still continue to be Vivian Lee's work in Gone with the Wind. And I didn't see Streetcar when I was a kid, but later understood that she really was the real deal. And as a kid, I was exposed to, my parents really were movie lovers. So I actually saw quite a few movies as a child. So I do have favorites, but your kid favorites are like Don Knotts,
Right. Yeah.
Which is nothing to say that he shouldn't be in a favorite of yours as an adult when you understand what it takes to do that level of physical comedy.
Right.
But I'm just saying most people don't, go, oh, Leo, whatever. It's Don Knotts for me, so.
Yeah. Right.
So the people I most admired growing up, I admired because they entertained me. They entertained me as a child. It's not like I understood what it was they were doing.
Sure. That's such a fascinating thing because there's, whenever I talk to somebody, there's like the people they enjoyed watching. And then when that flip switches, and they say, okay, now I have this idea. I want to be an actor. I want to become a director. they either deepen their appreciation for the people that entertain them, or
sure.
they find new people who maybe they didn't think of or they didn't find interesting, but now they're going, okay, I want to replicate that. That's who I want to be like. When
I would say I never realized, I never knew. I mean, I guess I'd seen some things like California Suite or whatever, but I never understood what Maggie Smith was up to until I became an actor. And then I was like, oh my God, Maggie Smith is killing all of us. She's killing every one eyebrow. She steals everything.
Yeah. What was the thing that flipped the switch for you where it was like, okay, going from being entertained to like now, boom, this is something that's possible. This is something I could do. What was it for you that did that?
You know, this is so inconvenient that this is like a very common question. It happens. I just was asked this when I was working on a movie Saturday, and I'm asked in a room full of people, and now you're asking me to tell in front of a bunch of strangers. And it's inconvenient for me because if I am face to face with somebody like I am with you, then I can gauge whether or not I feel comfortable sharing something spiritual with you. But when I'm speaking to the masses, it's a strange thing. And I've now been put in this position for 25 years of having to explain myself. I was called to this. I was in my mid-20s. I was teaching college and getting ready to start my doctorate. I already had my master's in creative writing and English literature. And that was my plan for myself. That was what I dreamed of as a child. And, you know, that's what I wanted to. Well, actually, originally I wanted to be an astronaut and a race car driver. But then somebody explained to me that I had girl parts and that apparently you can't do both things. So I wanted to be an author and a professor. That was both of which I've achieved by. I've now been an author and a professor. Yeah. But that was my goal. And so in my mid-20s, I was modeling part-time. I was teaching school, and I was running a dress shop, special occasion, wedding gowns, etc. And I had done a modeling gig in New York, and was taking the train home to DC, and I was on the train, just sort of watching the roll go by, and I heard a voice that said, "You're supposed to be an actor." Now, that was in 1987. Oh. And I still can't tell you why I'm supposed to be an actor. I cannot tell you whose voice that was, whether it was some inner thing screaming out to me, or whether it was, God or the universe or whatever you want to say. I have no idea. I'm not making a testimony here. I am telling you that I was called to this, and I answered the calling.
Did you come from a religious background? Like, did you have any explanation for this feeling or this phenomenon?
No, but when you hear a voice, I don't think you have to be religious. If you hear a voice,
makes you religious.
It didn't make me religious. It made me pay attention.
Sure.
No, I would say I am a spiritual person. I've gone to church, as of course most kids when you're my age, most of us went to church as kids, and then as you're older, you choose which church, what's my flavor and all that kind of stuff. And
sure.
So I did all the regular journey that people do. But I wouldn't say I was particularly religious. That said, I have had a number of strange moments that defied explanation, and this was one of them. And I don't always listen to voices. Before Quentin Tarantino told me that I should become a director, I'd already been told that by Jon Favreau and Ben Stiller together, ganged up on me together as become a director, and I didn't listen. So I could have ignored this voice, but my experience is that when you ignore a voice, whether it's slow down, there's going to be cops ahead, or, whatever, like whatever that voice is, if you don't listen to it, you end up later going, I should have listened to that. I knew it. Knew it. So I learned to listen to the voice by the time I was in my mid-20s, and I did.
Yeah. So listening to that voice, pushing in this direction, did you have any inkling where to start? Like, was it
No, I had to research. I didn't even know it was a job, much less how to start a career as that. No, and the first thing that happened was so discouraging because you got to keep in mind, this is pre-internet. So I'm not Googling anything, you know?
Right.
I'm not landing on web pages for the schools to choose from, et cetera. No, I'm going to the library and checking out books,
right,
and reading books. And yeah, it was sort of like the montage in the movie where you see me in the bathtub reading, you see me at the table reading, everywhere I am, I'm reading. And what I ran into a number of times was that less than 1% of people who figure out how to get in the union, which back then it was even harder to get into the union, way, way harder. Only less than 1% of the people who figure out that trick made enough money to live.
Wow.
And so that was very discouraging. I thought, well, why would I be called to do something that's going to make me poverty stricken? Doesn't make any sense. So,
right.
Yeah, but I did it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got most of my education from those books.
Yeah. What was the best piece of advice that you read that helped you kind of, crack the door open and step into this? Because like you said, it's such a small success rate, and Hollywood is full of people that want to be, A-list actors. They want to be the star. There's people that have that dream of just even getting on the screen. What was the best piece of advice that you read where you said, like, okay, I understand this to some extent. I understand this first step.
Well, again, I don't really, I never wanted to be a star. I wanted to be a professor. So I wasn't really, and I don't think I even understood how people saw me. I was making my money as a model and didn't figure out that meant that when people look at me, they just go model. I got my master's in 10 months. So I thought when people looked at me, they went smarty pants, like I just didn't. But from across the crowded room, I guess I didn't look like a straight A student. I looked like a model. And I just never really put all that together. So I was sort of behind the curve figuring out how the world perceived me.
Sure.
And so part of what an epiphany for me was realizing that, oh, the person I am on the inside that's driving the car of this body, I don't see the same thing they're seeing. All they see is the car. They don't see the driver until they get to know me. Right. And so I had to accept that. And that has continued to happen throughout my entire career, is learning how to deal with the fact that the person living inside of this, 5'10" body is not necessarily like, oh yes, I'm a model. Let me strut my stuff down the catwalk for you and strike a pose. And that's not the thoughts in my brain. The thoughts in my brain are professor thoughts, writer thoughts. So this is all sort of like off for me. The whole thing is like an education for me. I'm still figuring it out. Why am I doing this? Who am I in this? And all that. But what an interesting journey, rather than just saying, I'm a professor and a writer. And I figured that out at a very young age. And that's what I've done my whole life. That's, I guess, would have been a less fascinating journey.
Right.
The best advice that I got in the early times was when I was reading those books. First of all, that 1% thing was probably the best information I got, because it let me know, bail now. Yeah. Or assume that this is going to be a super hard, this is not going to be an easy thing to do. And I had gotten my master's in 10 months. So I was used to hard and not easy and battles, et cetera. So it's not like and that wasn't the first time I'd proven I could do something that was difficult. So I guess I that was the thing, is like, oh, this is going to be a huge challenge. This is going to test your ability to rise to an occasion. And the occasion being me. Yeah. So that was probably the first thing that spun me. But I also, during all that reading, found the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, which is the oldest acting school in the world, even older than all the ones in England, and one of the best. And they happened to be having auditions in DC like 3 weeks later, after I found them in a book. So that set me off on my course. It wasn't really advice so much as like, well, here's a school you should pay attention to.
Yeah.
And of course, again, couldn't Google it. So I had to research it and call them on the telephone, that was attached to the wall. And so, yeah.
Well, I'm curious on that perspective, because obviously very academic. You came from that background. You're used to working hard, studying, researching. Whenever you listen to any filmmakers talk, you get one of two things when it comes to education and film school, and that you have the people that go, film school is a waste of time, just go make films. That's your film school. And then you've got people that say, go find someone to coach you, teach you. Do you think that, the time going into and educating for acting, going to like doing acting school, do you think that's a worthwhile thing for people? It's a must step in that road? Or do you think it's something where people should just get into it and get to work?
I actually don't know anybody that hasn't had any training at all. That's not a real thing.
Yeah.
No. I taught graduate school students in the film program at UNO, at University of New Orleans, how to work with actors. And they were all obviously people who chose the path of get educated through a formal training system. And that is one way to go. It's something that I did. It's something that lots of people did. It's not what I did when I became a director. I didn't have time to go back to college again, and get yet another degree to prove that I knew how to. I followed the Tarantino School of Directing, which is that, he worked at that video store for 10 years and he watched every video they had on a shelf. Right. And one reason we connected is that I worked at a movie theater for 8 years, tearing tickets after I got my degrees. Yeah, that was the first thing I did when I got to LA was I got a job tearing tickets at a movie theater, and I watched. It had 18 screens. I watched 18 screens worth of movies every chance I got.
Right.
And that was my education. And it's very common that is a story, that the idea that your education is coming from observation. Right. Of other greats doing their work and other crappy people doing their work. You learn a lot from mistakes too, other people's and your own. I remember one time RichardDreyfuss took me with him to an acting class where he was speaking. And one of the students asked, what is your process? When you get a role, what is your process? And he said, what do you do to prepare? And he said, oh, nothing. I knew him, and I can tell you the guy tortured himself for every role. So continues to torture himself for every role. He prepares himself like crazy. It's like driving a clutch. It's hard to explain it to somebody else because you get so used to it that you don't really realize that you're doing all these things. And he's been acting since he was 9 years old. Yeah. So to him, explaining his process would be like explaining what it's like to eat or what, he
just does it.
Do it. Yeah. You just do it. Right. Yeah. So, but he is also hyper educated. He didn't go to school for that. He went to Beverly High, but at Beverly High, his best friends were, now let me remember all the names. I'm aging. Albert Brooks, Rob Reiner, and Larry Bishop, right? Who is Joey Bishop's son, and Rob Reiner was Carl Reiner's son, and wow. And Albert Brooks back then was Albert Einstein. He hadn't changed his name yet. So anyway, so the four of them ran around pretty good together, and two of them had grown up in the business. So like even as a child, he was being led by mentors, and it was just the dads of his friends at school. But and so all of us, whether it's Quentin with the video store or all of us, I have learned way more after going to the American Academy than I did at the American Academy. But everything I learned at the American Academy was essential, not just to my ability to get into the industry, but to my confidence level. My first movie was just surrounded with Academy Award winners and nominees. I would have choked if I hadn't felt like, what? I've done Shakespeare, I've done Brecht, I've done Ibsen. I can handle a couple of lines in this stupid movie.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've worked with, like I said, you mentioned already so many names, RichardDreyfuss, I mean, he's somebody that when I first reached out, you said that was one of the people that was a big inspiration to you. You'd obviously, I mean, everybody's seen a Richard Dreyfuss movie, like at least Jaws, like everybody's at least seen
or Close
one.
Encounters,
yeah. Or Close
American
Encounters
Graffiti,
or What About Bob? Or, right. And
if they haven't, they should.
yeah, absolutely. Like pause this interview and go watch that and come back,
right.
But it's your first project listed is working with Richard Dreyfuss, which is fascinating. Like, and I'm sure you can tell the story, but it's, your first project is working with someone who you'd watched. It's like, this is a hero.
No, that's a weird thing. And it's something that's happened over and over in my career now, but that is a weird thing is that you get to work with and or meet people who you have admired since you were little thing. And American Graffiti, I have to tell you, was one of my favorite movies is one of my favorite movies of all time, but it was a bit of an obsession for me. When you're a kid in the era I grew up in, if we wanted to see a movie more than one time, we had to get dressed, get transportation, get money, and go to the movie theater again and find a seat and sit with the popcorn and all, again and again and again. And so when somebody my age tells you they've seen a movie 13 times, that's what they're saying. They're saying they got dressed, got in a car, didn't
were
have
invested.
A life yet.
Yeah.
So yes. So I was like that with American Graffiti. I just had to see it over and over and over. And when it came on television back in the day, I was like, because then it was running all the time on television. Then I bought the soundtrack. And then I'm going to say, this is a strange thing. In high school, back in the early 80s, late 70s, I don't know, I'm pretty old. I bought a screenplay of American Graffiti. They had one at the bookstore, and I bought the screenplay. And it was the first time in my whole life that I had ever bought a screenplay, and the first time in my whole life that I ever read a screenplay.
Wow.
Was American Graffiti. So
there's a huge connection.
That was a thing that I brought with me. And also then came Close Encounters, which is, again, to this day, one of the best movies.
It's one of Spielberg's best, maybe the best. I mean, yeah.
It's certainly incredible. One of my, I have, top 2 favorite sci-fi movies of all time.
Yeah.
Top 3.
It's a masterpiece. Like his collaboration with Spielberg on both Jaws and, they're 2 masterpieces. Like there's not one frame of either one that I would change. They're amazing. It's funny. We had talked beforehand, a little bit about, working with Richard Dreyfuss and when you see that in your first credit on IMDb, you go, oh, that's cool. Richard Dreyfuss, picked Laura to come be in a movie. And that's not what happened. So
no, it's not.
You landed Richard Dreyfuss the job. How does that happen? Like what fell into place for that to work out?
Well, I had met Richard in New York, and then
through the acting school.
Well, yes, in a way, insofar as that school, the American Academy, they used to get, and I hope still do, free tickets from Broadway for whatever was running and had an empty seat, and so it was almost always going to be a matinee show.
Okay,
and I had a different schedule than a lot of the other people in my school. So I was taking night courses and could go to the theater in the daytime.
Wow.
So I saw, like 75 plays.
What an education by itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you want to be great, you have to watch greatness and understand what it is and all the different colors of it. So I have a friend named Jannard Burks, who you should IMDb. He's a great actor himself, who he was also doing what I was doing. He was going and seeing all these plays, but he was taking it a step further, and he would wait by the stage door and talk to the actors afterward. So he brought me with him one time to do that. And when I realized how easy that was, I thought, then this is what I'm doing from now on. Mm-hmm. And so those 75 plays I saw, many of them, I would choose whoever was the performance I was most drawn in by, most impressed by, most affected by. And I would wait by the stage door and I would let everybody else sort of get away. And then I would focus on that one person and say, I have a question I'm going to ask you. And all but one person was very, very kind and willing. I was smart about timing and all that. And so all but one person was very, very forthcoming, giving me great answers. And I was getting ready to move to LA. And the very last play that I saw starred 3 people: Glenn Close,
wow, Gene
Hackman, and Richard Dreyfuss. I mean, that's a play.
That's unreal. Yeah.
It was Death and the Maiden. And which later became a film starring none of those people. Did Gene do it? Maybe Gene did it. Anyway, I ended up later doing a movie with Gene Hackman, Enemy of the State. That was pretty early in my career. Glenn came out and I was able to speak to her because she came out very early. And she had this huge bodyguard who has since passed away. And the 3 of us hung out while I asked her this question. And then I waited for Gene, I let pass. And then I waited for, because Gene's character, he had been in the play and the movie Death and the Maiden. That character is tied to a chair and gagged for a lot of stuff. So the performance wasn't the one so I let him pass. And then Richard came out and I did the same thing I always did, which I would wait for all the autograph hounds and, all the people who had come and spent a lot of money and wanted something else for that, or, and so I waited for all them to pass. And then I was the last one left and said, can we walk and talk? I'd love to ask you one question. So I asked him the same question. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what it is, because I know you're going to ask. I asked them all the same question. If you could go back and tell yourself one thing when you were starting out, what would it be? And I loved his answer. It was a great answer. It was about fear and not letting it make your decisions for you. And we became friends in that. He was the last of the people that I met at those stage doors. And we just hit it off of that moment. He loved the question. I loved his answer. And we just hit it off. And that was 30 years ago. Wow. So we stayed in touch as I moved to LA, which is where he was from. And so when I had a friend who was producing a series of short films directed by actors, and I think, I'm trying to remember some of the other people that had done. In any case, he was saying, listen, I know you're friends with Richard. Would Richard like to direct a short film? And I knew that the answer was yes. And so I said, yeah. And he said, well, can you make that happen? And I said, sure. So I put together Richard with my friend, and Richard and another friend of his wrote a half-hour script, and they made this movie, and I got one line. It starred Ann Archer and William Peterson. And I had one line as the waitress. and that's that. So when you look at my IMDb, it says, I had this line as a waitress thing in this first thing. But it wasn't as humble a beginning as it looks like, because I created that job for myself. Yeah. And for him. Yes. And I should have probably been a producer, but I didn't understand that at the time, and nobody told me. Right. Yeah. Nobody clued you in on the show business side of how it works. No. It's amazing, because that's something that, reading through your book, and I mean, talk about no small parts, starting in that role, but there's so much behind that and so much power behind that. One thing throughout your career is you've been a connector between so many people, and you've been a constant with so many people. It might be why I'm an actor. It might be that's what the voice meant. I have no idea. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, because there's so many pieces where, one, you've connected with so many people, and who see the talent that you have, and they resonate with something in you, and that's, to me, I always find that interesting, because there's people that get, they blow up for a period of time, and they are huge for, or someone tries to make them huge for a couple years, and then they kind of fade away. When I see people who are consistently working,
directors return to them time and time again, or producers go to them those are the people that are really interesting to me, because, the fact that you've mentioned you've been working now for, a long time consistently in a lot of different roles, a lot of different capacities, and with a lot of the same people time and time again. What quality in you, and it's hard to be introspective like this, but what do you think a director like a Tarantino, who could cast anybody, sees in you? Or what do you think of Richard Dreyfuss to give you the trust as a young actor to say, like, I'll take a look at, what you're presenting to me? What do you think it is, that frequency there?
What is it that makes them pay attention to me?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably be better to ask them. I think, look, I'm going to be honest with you that I do think, as disadvantageous as it is to be a woman in my industry, as disadvantageous as it is on so many levels that it's staggering, the advantage in the world of being a attractive female or whatever is that you get 5 minutes of attention from pretty much anything. You can get five. I can get 5 minutes with the president, a pope, or what. It doesn't matter, because they, there's some sort of biological thing happening there that's, beyond our control, that if you're an attractive person, people will give you a little bit of attention to figure out if they have any use for you or something. I don't know. It could get into your world. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what the 5 minutes is for, but I do know that I can get 5 minutes with pretty much anybody. And so some of that is just biology. I think that, I'm a pretty girl and you're talking about powerful men. So, or I was a pretty girl. Now I'm a fading beauty or whatever at this age, whatever this, I'm not a girl anymore. That's what the point. But that coupled with that, I've never, ever been confused that this is a tough job and you should be really prepared for it. And I have always been that way, whether it was spending 3 years getting educated in, at the American Academy, or doing off Broadway in New York to get ready to be a performer, or whether it was, doing short films and student films, whatever, to learn how to be in front of camera, or all the classes I took once I moved to LA, because I took, I was there 18 years. I took pretty much 18 years of classes, so like, I was never not educating myself and not taking this career extremely seriously.
Right. Yeah.
And the people that I have met along the way, like in Ivana Chubbuck's class, sitting with me were Joanna Cassidy, who had been working since the 60s or 70s. I don't know. Joanna's in her 70s now. So how long has she been working? But Blade Runner wasn't the beginning of her career. And that was, that was a while ago. And RuPaul sat next to me. RuPaul had already had an entire career before drag and, not his drag, I'm saying Drag Race, the TV show. Yeah. And, like the people, it was Kim Fields, it was David Faustino. It was all these people who had been working since the 70s and 80s were in my class with me, still pursuing and still working. And many of us, the best was ahead. Joanna Cassidy had a way better career on television after the time that we started class together. RuPaul's career is just
it's biggest it's ever been.
Yes, and particularly as an actor, very impressive. That TV show Queen, and something about her and the kid. I mean, him and the kid, him and drag and the kid. That was a great. I mean, God, he did great work in that. So, I guess I've always understood and respected that this is not a get rich quick scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a vocation. This is something you do.
Yeah.
It's some all day, every day. Like it's something you are, you have to inhabit the life of it.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, when people see that in somebody else, when they, like when I worked with, Dennis Christopher in, Django, I had fallen in love with Dennis Christopher's character in Breaking Away, which I think was in the late 70s, early 80s. And I thought his character was just so well portrayed. So well portrayed. I mean, just loved that character. Loved the movie. Again, saw it a bunch of times in the theater. And when he and I worked together, he was like me. He's he's conservatory trained. So his whole body has been trained as an instrument, whether that's voice, posture, all the things you need to create a character. All of it had been trained, just like it had been with me. But, there were also people working with us who had come up through the comedy circuit, or who had come up through just flying by the seat of their pants, or people like Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, Leo was born to do this, been doing it since he was 3. It is his calling in a different way. He was born for this, and he will teach us about this. He's like a little Buddha that he just came fully cooked,
Yeah.
But when he works, he hires people to help him learn certain things he needs to learn, whether it's an accent or a physical trait or what, he hires people to help him and train him. So anybody who's serious about this gets it, that it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's really hard work. And you spot other hard workers in a crowd.
Yeah. Well, that's what
respected me. I think that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's what's coming through in your answer. And now I think about even in the book, you're taking, it's in the name of the book, No Small Parts, because I think some people who think about doing anything, this could go beyond acting, but any role, we all have this self-importance of like, okay, this is my stepping stone to the big thing. And I think for a lot of people, there's a struggle when they're in those small opportunities. They don't take it seriously because they're above it already in their mind. And for you, I loved in your book, you talk about working on Django Unchained, which again, your part came from taking very seriously a very short scene within Kill Bill that gave Tarantino okay, I'm going to use you again. I'm going to write a part with you in mind. But within Django, you talk about preparing, you talk about using the fan, and doing all of this work to develop this character. 5 months of prep for a character that someone could have came in and said, I'm just the throwaway, I'm the sister character in the movie. But you can see that even though those scenes aren't in the movie, you feel like you're just as much a part of the movie as Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who is throughout the entire runtime. You don't feel like you're just coming in and phoning in the scene. And that's what I'm getting from your answer, is that taking it so seriously and throwing yourself 100% into what could be considered a small role. And
I do that no matter what I just did, like I mentioned, I did a movie on Saturday, and that was 2 scenes, small part, less than 5 minutes of film time that opens their movie. And I didn't get there. They had a sort of emergency situation. So I didn't actually get the part until Friday, and I worked Saturday. So guess how much prep time I had, And so I didn't have very much prep time, obviously, but I know how to use it. And I didn't use it just memorizing lines. I know that somebody will give me my line if I forget my line. But they're not going to be able to tell me who that person is and why she's doing what she's doing.
Yeah.
So I had to research that. And I didn't spend my one day just memorizing words. I figured, it's a small part. Somebody will yell the words to me if I need them.
Yeah.
I am going to spend this time creating a character who is a believable human being, who is who this script is wanting to open their movie with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think it was in Karen Grassley's autobiography I was just reading, where she said, memorization is the easiest part.
Would they pay me to memorize stuff? Right. If they would pay me to memorize stuff, I'd be making a fortune doing just auditions.
Right,
and do you have any idea how much stuff I have to memorize for auditions?
Right, it's exactly that though. It's who are you though? No one's going to tell you. They can shout a line, they can't tell you who you are. That's a really cool insight, and that's. Again, so, that's interesting seeing that replicated amongst successful people, that mindset of just, it's not just remembering the line, knowing when to say it. And that's another thing I've noticed too, is you can always tell good actors because when they're in a dialogue scene, you can see that they're not just thinking about what their next line is. You can watch, when you watch a bad project, you can see someone where, they'll say their line and then they'll stare at the actor, and
What's worse? Have you ever caught an actor doing the other person's lines with their mouth?
I've never seen it in a final movie. I've read stories about people doing it.
They do.
Or there's I forget what the movie is. There's a child actor in a movie. I do remember actually seeing a clip. I don't even remember what the movie is. And I probably shouldn't even say it if I did, but I remember there was a child actor and they were like moving their head along with the lines of like, what they're supposed to say. But I love when you can see an actor there in their eyes, you can see their character thinking and feeling something while the other person's saying, that's really cool to me.
Well, listening is such a critical part of acting, no matter how big your part is, but the smaller your part is, the more critical listening
the more important, the less you're saying.
Because you want to get that screen time while the celebrity is talking. So while the main character is having their moment, you want the camera to check in with your reaction. So you better have some, you better care.
Right. Or they're not going to cut back to you.
About what the lead actor is saying in your scene, the more the camera is going to want to, the editor and all that is going to choose your reaction over their words.
When it comes to that, when it comes to standing out in a scene, because you've done this very well, obviously, in so many different projects, you stand out, even if it's standing out to the people involved in it who are going to be, providing a next job or opening another door. You found a way to stand out, even with the smallest of characters. You've written so much about that. Where's the balance between trying to take over a scene and trying to go overboard? Like you always hear stories about the extra that's doing too much to try to get attention, or the actor that has one line, they overdo it. What's the balance between taking over the scene and adding a noticeable, character or something that's going to stand out?
Well, first of all, if you're the lead, you're allowed to steal the scene. So, I write extensively in my book about my first experience working on a giant set, and it was Shirley MacLaine and a cast of thousands. And Shirley stole the scene right out from all of us other people, including other Academy Award winners, et cetera. And she's allowed to do that because she's the star of that movie. And so if she steals the scene in a scene where she had no lines whatsoever, so I never saw it coming, then fine, more power to her. It's her movie. So even if it's not her scene, it's her movie, so she can steal it. For those of us who are supporting cast, it is trickier because I am a little bit of a thief, and I don't consider it stealing. I consider it owning. I earn my screen time. I own my part and earn my screen time. And if you don't, while you're working with me, woe befall you. It's not my fault if you can't hold up your end of the screen.
Wow.
So to me, that can be dangerous a game to play, because if you outplay the lead and somebody doesn't like it, they'll just cut it. But if you do it in a way that everything I know about actors is that everything I'm doing when I'm acting is about the other character. So if I'm doing my job well, then the more I get invested in my moment and the more I make it, a bigger moment. If that's all about the other character, I'm still serving the lead. I'm still serving the star, and I shouldn't end up on the cutting room floor. And I don't.
It becomes less competition and elevating each other.
Yes, I am promoting the scene. I am promoting how big their deal is. And, because I'm elevating and escalating the stakes in the scene for the star.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's a great explanation. I remember you telling the story in the book about her taking the scene and you thinking like, that's what it is. Like, that's how you do it.
And the biggest thing I learned was give yourself permission to steal. That was awesome. The biggest thing, is she just totally dominated that scene in a way that was jaw-dropping and eye-opening, but it was also, and in a way I could repeat, but it was also, she earned it. She
Yeah.
She didn't steal that scene by being a jerk.
Right. Or being over the top.
Right. She wasn't trying to steal the scene because she thought she was better than us. She stole the scene because what she was doing was more interesting than what we were doing.
Yeah. Super interesting. I know we're getting near the end of our time here, but I want to ask about this because,
first of all, just so you know, I can flex a little bit,
okay,
and you can always revisit me at another date.
Okay, perfect. Because there's so much. I mean, there's so much in your book and so many notes, and I'm fascinated by your thought process, and there's a billion questions. But one of the things that is really important to me, I do another show. I talk with sexual abuse survivors, and so that's been part of my life for the last 2 years, doing advocacy work in that area. And I was really grateful for the section of your book where you talked about the Me Too movement, and adding that into the book, I think, was very powerful. And as much as we talk about working with Tarantino, on the flip side of that, there's a heavy shadow that looms over those projects, and Harvey Weinstein, which that name has been in the news nonstop for the last several years. You've never had an experience with Harvey Weinstein directly like that, but it was something that
not a sexual one. I will go ahead and say, as a character witness to that man, that is a terrible person. That is a terrible person. He's terrible to everybody. And also there was sexual stuff, and that didn't happen to me.
Yeah. Were you nervous writing about this at all? Because obviously, sure. It's a big thing. And as much as you can say, you can't fire someone for speaking out about something like that. It's people that do speak out about this stuff get in trouble, and there's people.
Well, one thing I didn't do was I didn't tell any of my own personal stories, and I didn't, and in that way I did not name names, and so that helps protect me, because now there's no one person who I've called out, and therefore there's no threat to any one person. I am talking about the industry in general, and as you know, my own part. I am talking about what I did to contribute to that culture, and what the culture of silence, the culture of allowance, the culture of acceptance of the unacceptable, allowance of the unallowable, and silence about everything that ever happened to me, everything I ever witnessed, everything I knew was happening. I was silent about all of it, just as almost every single woman in the history of Hollywood has been.
Right. Yeah. When you look at these situations like a Harvey Weinstein, you sit there and go, like, how does it happen? How does it get to this point? How do you have a culture that's this silent? What do you think contributed to that? Like, how does someone get away with that for so long? And obviously Harvey Weinstein's being dealt with, but there's still issues in the industry. One guy out of many.
Now problem is solved. We made 10,000 men, and got one, and so problem solved. Right. I would say the setup for me being silent started the day I was born, and they said, it's a girl. Because the second that you were born in my era as a female, we were told often and in no uncertain terms that you don't say things like that. You just don't accuse men of anything. And if you do, plan to lose everything. So I am just one of the millions of 57-year-old women who was groomed from birth to take it.
Yeah.
Just take it. And if you say anything, you'll lose everything. And how could that not be true? Men ran everything when I was born. So I would say the grooming started way before Hollywood. But by the time I got into the industry, I'd already modeled for 10 years. I'd already seen my share and been through my share of craziness. And I'd been a girl my whole life, so I'd been being treated the way girls get treated in a world where silence is the rule. That's a really great system for predators.
Yeah.
Heck, that's a great system just for opportunists, just like guy on a date with a drunk girl kind of thing, that's a great system. So I would say that Hollywood is not responsible for me being a silent partner. I just arrived that way, as so many women my age did, arrive that way, already groomed and ready to be part of the machinery of silence.
Yeah.
But within that community, there's this other brainwashing, grooming, whatever, systematic reshaping of your thought processes that comes through, I guess the word we use now would be exceptionalism, that our community is exceptional and we do things a different way, and we can't be held to the regular rules because they don't really apply to us because we're special. So, like, for example, shoulder massages. I'll bet at IBM, they don't sit around giving each other shoulder massages. But at my job, it's relatively common that, we work 18, 20-hour days. It can get grueling. You could be wearing a costume that weighs 40 pounds. Like, it can be really physically. And on higher budget films, they might hire a masseuse to come in and have one of those little things where you can stick your, lay forward and they'll just grab your shoulders real quick and then send you back out. But, who has that kind of money? This is like 3 movies that have ever done that. And everybody else is having to make do. So we all rub each other's shoulders. Plus, crew never gets that masseuse, like they have to rub each other's shoulders. So it's just something that happens.
Yeah.
So when I would hear seminars or whatever on TV, they would do, maybe it'd be in a sitcom, they'd have a joke or whatever, and it would be about rubbing shoulders. I'd think, well, that doesn't really apply to us because we're exceptional. We're different. We have different rules. And I applied that to nude scenes, sex scenes, kissing scenes, all that stuff. We're different. We're special. The rules don't apply. And then one day, I guess about 7 or 8 years ago, I said something about work. And my now husband said, that's against the law. And I said, no, it's not. It's not. And he goes, yes, it is. And I goes, no. I'm sure it is, like where you work, but no, not
not in our area.
And he goes, no, it's a federal law, I'm not making this up. There's a federal law. Yeah. And I was like, oh, no, but that doesn't apply to us and I literally spent, like 20 minutes arguing over whether that federal law applied to my industry because my industry is different and special and Yeah. So I have to say that is systemic. That is, we do have an unusual job, and nobody else I know in any other career that I have lots of friends in lots of careers, and none of them have ever had to like get in their underwear and make out with a stranger in front of 200 people, like that's weird. It's a weird job. And I do a weird job. And I guess it's confusing. Where's the line between weird and illegal?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation. I know you mentioned Diane Franklin in your book, talking about conventions. And I asked her because she makes no bones about like her career in the 80s. I mean, she was the girl. I mean, she was the dream girl. She was doing nudity and, and it is a very, it's a very thin line between being exploitative and, doing something for the art of a movie, and she talks about in her book, after signing the contract, after shooting her scene, sitting in the car with a producer who's saying, can you do full nudity? Can you do that? And it's, you don't have that conversation working, like you said, at IBM. You don't have that conversation working at a bank.
No, and people think they know what they would say or do in a moment like that. No, you don't.
No, it's your career.
You don't.
Yeah.
You're terrified. You finally got your break, and they're going to fire you if you won't go from what they agreed to do to what you never agreed to do. And they're going to fire you for something like not taking your top off or what, so that's confusing. And it's not something men by and large have to deal with. It is a female issue in our industry of that we sign contracts, but sometimes we're not warned in advance about things that are going to happen on set. Sometimes things are not as they were described. Sometimes, there's all sorts of things, but Diane actually had a rougher ride with that than I did. I have to say I think people familiar with my career know I spent a lot of time in my underwear. But I actually have been pretty blessed that I haven't been made to feel hyper vulnerable in those moments. And I am a guy girl, a good sport or whatever. So I'm used to a little bit of rough talk, and I'm used to a little rough behavior, and it doesn't scare me as much as it might scare somebody that doesn't spend as much time with dudes as I do. So I think I had a little bit of a different experience because, when guys would try and push me, I was so used to guys, I would just push back.
Sure. Yeah.
Not about the work, not in a way that was about asserting my power because I had none, but in a way where, like, if they came at me like, just kidding, just checking out, just seeing what'll happen, I would come back with like, you're so funny, I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And then if it got real, then I would be in the same situation Diane had been put in.
Sure. Right. Yeah. What do you think obviously it's probably not a good answer to this, but everyone's trying to figure out, what do you do about this? The culture's been there. Just the story of the casting couch is as old as Hollywood. And it was a lot more blatant than it is now. There's studios where you can see the room, but even now it's still an issue. Like we said, Harvey Weinstein is a drop in the bucket of, a very widespread problem. How do we course correct this? Obviously I think just having more women in positions of power, as in addition to men, is big. But what do you think? How do we get this conversation bigger?
The same way that happened with me. The same thing that happened with me. You start at birth. You start at birth teaching women that they are just as valuable as men. And you start at birth teaching men that they're no more valuable than women. And you do that from birth. And then you have broken the grooming. Yeah. Yeah, because then you're an adult by the time you get into the world of the grooming, and you might be able to see it for what it is. You're trying to groom me. I won't have it.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And it's a simple answer, but it's true. And it's, I talk about that with my other show all the time. Like, there's the conversation just around it needs to change, and even some of the stories you hear, you're just like, the ones that scare me are the ones where it's not ill intention. It's just second nature. Right. It's like you mentioned, you mentioned the guy, you hang out with a lot of guys, you hear the crude jokes and stuff. And it's like, I even think like, growing up in high school, like there weren't people saying like, hey, don't say that, or don't do that. But it's just, it's like unintentional, just misogyny or unintentional.
I do it. Yeah. I don't do it as much now, but before the Me Too movement, I did it all the time.
Yeah. You have to learn. You have to unlearn and learn.
Women in my own way.
Sure.
But the thing about the book is that I wanted to give people a resource. The reason I included the Me Too chapter, and like you said, it was difficult to decide to approach it at all, to even say that
it's easy not to, which is one of the reasons
way easier not
thrived.
To.
Yeah.
But I had already been planning to do the second edition of Known Small Parts. It had been 7 years, and there had been a lot of changes in the industry. And one of the biggest was self-taping. We had suddenly gone from all this wisdom I had to tell you about how to score at an audition was suddenly like, does this even apply anymore? Because I was teaching people how to be good in a room, and now they're not in the room anymore. So I thought, well, I have to do something about self-taping. I owe that to my readers, that they would get an update on how do you audition in this new world, because this self-taping thing is not going away. It's not going away. Yeah. It doesn't matter if COVID disappeared tomorrow, which of course it won't. But even if it did, it doesn't matter. The self-taping is here to stay. So I knew I wanted to include that in a second edition. I also knew that I wanted to include information about being at conventions, because conventions had changed so much from a place where careers go to die to being where you might launch your next Marvel movie.
It's an essential now.
Yeah. So I thought, well, I need to address that. And that's how Diane Franklin became involved in the book. So I wanted to do those two editions, and I wanted to do an overhaul for technical stuff and, just things that have changed in the last 7 years. When the Harvey thing happened, you have to imagine that for somebody like me, it was like I woke up, turned on the TV, and God was in handcuffs. he was the most powerful person in that entire city, industry. I mean, he was it. He was the guy, and he was in handcuffs. And it separated me from myself. Like I had an odd out of body experience of like, what is happening? Is this real? Yeah. Like, is that real? You know, like I'm looking at the TV going, huh? So I saw an opportunity for change. And I started with me. And then I wanted to share with others because I knew I couldn't possibly be the only person who was having trouble figuring all this out. And then I got very inspired to share with people who hadn't yet entered our industry or who were just entering our industry or who only been doing this for a couple of years, that they would have this information starting out.
Yeah. The reality of the industry and what all was there.
Yeah. And then for those of us who've already been doing this for 100 years, I wanted them to have the information of what do you do if it happens to you? What do you do if you witness it? What do you do? You know, all that, the what do you do's, how do you handle it from the second you either witness or are, you know, involved in something, to how do you take care of yourself afterward in you know, self-care.
Yeah.
So, so, and there's a lot of resources listed there, places people can reach out to, whether it's to report or whether it's to receive help. And then in the meantime, the union has changed their website. They've developed an app. Like now there's all sorts of tools for reporting, whether it's anonymously or on the record. You can put your story. And like if something happens, whether you're a witness or whether it's occurring to you, you're the target. You can now upload all the details, the time, and who was witnessing, you know, all the details. You can put all that into the app and not send it anywhere, not name it, just have it there dated in case you ever need it.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are resources now. And I wanted to make sure people knew, here's what you do in this situation.
Right. Because nobody is sitting down and telling you that before, you know, and I think that's so valuable and important. And just having, I mean, even the anonymous reporting is so huge, you know, like it takes the pressure off of a production assistant who's saying, how do I report Harvey Weinstein? You know,
right.
Like who do I go to? He's the boss. He's the boss of bosses.
He's God. How do you report God?
Yeah. Right. It's crazy, but I appreciate you putting that chapter in. It's so important. And, you know, it's, you know, my other show, I deal with clergy abuse. You know, it's the same issues. You've got people literally people claiming to be oracles for God, you know, and abusing. It's so powerful, but I want to transition here. I like asking a couple quick questions at the end. And like I said, I definitely hope this isn't the last time because I've got a billion questions for you. But I guess I'll ask you this first. You know, you talked about the question you asked every actor. I'm going to turn that on you. If you could go back to the beginning of your career and tell yourself one thing, what would it be?
If I could tell myself one thing, I don't think it'd be the same thing I would tell everybody else, because I actually already had this information from being a model and being, you know, I had already been involved in a different version of this industry of being in front of other people. I would go back and tell other people, this is not a get rich quick scheme, and you are not one break away from being discovered, and it's not that you don't have an agent or that your agent sucks. It's not that. So don't focus so much on the getting an agent and the, you know, finding your break. And if I had understood, and I say this in the book, if I had understood that all that time that I was waiting for this break was time that I was actually achieving a lot of other things, I would have used it better. I would have at least seen it differently. I would have understood that I was already having my career. I was already doing the part of my career that comes before the next parts. Yeah. And that all the times that I would say, but I'm ready to work now. I'm ready to work now. Yes, I was ready to work. But the thing is that I was being included in Academy Award winning movies. And so I had to be better than ready. I had to be good. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's not a good get rich quick scheme. It's not something where you're just nobody is waiting to discover you. That is not how it works. I think when, I use the analogy of basketball in my book that nobody sits at home watching basketball games from the NBA and goes, once I get an agent, I am going to be an NBA player. No,
right.
You have to do the work to be an NBA player. And then probably somebody will notice that you're better and different than everybody around you. So, So be better and different. Focus on that. Create your own work like I did with Richard's movie. Create your own work. I didn't have an agent. I didn't know. I was nobody. I wasn't in the union. I was a nobody. And I created a job for myself and an Academy Award winner. So, I think the cart and the horse get confused. The agent is not the first step. The agent comes because you're worth money and they want 10% of it.
Right. Showbiz.
Yeah. Well, it's what you would do if you were an agent.
Yeah, 100%. Right. What of your films do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
Wow, that's a great question. Obviously, I'm very proud of my work in Django. I did have the luxury of spending quite a bit of time working on that character. And it might have been 3 months. I know I shot for 5 months. It might have been 3 months of prep, but whatever it is, I had the script a long time before I shot that movie. And then I knew I had the part months before I shot that movie. So that is probably the best reflection of all the different kinds of training I've had and all the experience I had had to that point coming together to create a role that I then had the luxury of 5 months to play out. So that's probably the best representation. That said, one of my favorite roles was every once in a while, a character will just pop up fully formed when I read it. And one of those was a movie I did called Convergence. Okay. Where it said church lady. And, I'm not, my idea of church lady is Dana Carvey, I don't right. Or my mama, or, when I think church lady, I don't think, oh yeah, get Laura Cayouette for that. I have some preconceived notions, but this woman popped into my head fully formed. She didn't move like me. She had different facial expressions than I did. Her voice was a little different. She was different than me, but she popped up fully formed, like boom, just there as I'm reading the script. And so in a way, I feel like that's a great representation of an entirely instinctual experience of, now, obviously I have to back it up with all the work, but yeah, that character, and that's happened to me a few times where she just birthed herself. Yeah.
With Django, really quick, I know that was a linear shoot, which is very rare. They shot everything in sequence.
It wasn't you can never really do that, but it was mostly linear.
Was that helpful as an actor?
Absolutely.
Like, was it far easier doing that than trying to shoot out of order or trying to?
I did a part on True Detective, and they were shooting different time eras on the same day. Forget different scenes and they were shooting like it'd be 1980 and then it'd be 2010. Then it'd be like that is very difficult. And I have shot movies where I've had to shoot scenes from the beginning to the end and the middle all in one day. That is extremely difficult, extremely difficult. And one of the advantages to shooting in order, obviously there are 1,000 disadvantages, is why we don't do it. It's too expensive. Yeah. But one of the biggest advantages is for your actors, for your performers, there is a building of a character arc, a through line that they are allowed to do for you in real time. They're allowed to create that for you in real time. And that is only imitated when you take us out of order.
Yeah. What do you think is the best decade of film history?
It feels like a trick question. I'm going to say the 70s. I meant 90s. But it's probably the 70s.
Yeah. I was talking to someone the other day. The 70s and 90s are very similar in how they're
similar because
about.
they're when the vanguard came and pushed out the establishment. What's funny is that, of course, the establishment being pushed out in the 90s was the vanguard from the 70s. You know, the Lucases and the Spielbergs and all that.
They had become the Hollywood blockbuster.
Yeah, they had become the machine. And so the vanguard of that 1 year at Sundance, where it was Quentin, Robert Rodriguez, Allison Anders, who else? Well, whatever. There was a list of people who came out of that moment that pushed the next era of independent cinema and the independent voice and what that would look like.
Yeah.
And obviously Quentin dominated that conversation.
Right. Yeah, he's who we immediately think of. Yeah. Doing that. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
Oh, well, I think you do what Ocean's 11 did. You choose a film that wasn't very good. You don't choose Gone with the Wind. No, you don't. You don't remake. Please, people, stop remaking great movies. Just re-release them. Yeah. Young people haven't seen them. Just re-release great movies. Remake mediocre movies that could have been great. Yeah. Or at least could have been more fun. Like Ocean's 11 was okay, but then they remade
great premise,
it and
great
it was way more
cast.
fun.
Yeah. But, yeah.
So yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I was heavily influenced by this movie called Goodbye Charlie. That is Tony Curtis and like it's a Walter Matthau's in it, and in any case, it's a fun movie. And then they remade it with Ellen Barkin and Jimmy Smits, and it was painfully bad. I guess it's something that I wish people would. Since that movie affected me so much, I wish young people could see that movie in case it would affect any of them. The thing that it gave me was it's about reincarnation, and it's a comedy. And there's a womanizing guy who dies and comes back as a gorgeous woman and has to deal with all the abuse he had heaped on women because to be a woman. And I really related to that as a small child because I like I said, I feel like this is the car and the driver is this amorphous thing. And so I don't feel like the inside of me is necessarily male or female or what. It's just a soul. You know, there's this soul in there, and I could have just as easily been born into a boy body and had a totally different life with the same soul. And so I related to that movie in that way. And I think it's an interesting concept. And I wish somebody sophisticated would remake it as a comedy still, but as a more sophisticated exploration of that concept.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. What is a movie that fans of yours would be surprised to hear that you enjoy?
To watch?
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know what my fans really.
You're very eclectic with what you cite as being influences. I'm always fascinated asking people, like I've asked people that do nothing but direct horror movies, and they're like, I love watching this rom-com, but you're very eclectic. So I don't even think there's one you could say that would shock me.
I mean, I can tell you some of my favorite movies, but I don't know that any of them are a surprise because I don't know, is somebody going to be surprised? If somebody knows me through Quentin's movies, they're not going to be surprised that I'm a fan of Terminator 2 or The Matrix. Right. But if somebody knows me as a professor,
let's flip it this way. What's a movie that you find to be underrated? So maybe a movie like we talked about earlier, that there's movies that we watch as entertainment, and then there's movies when you become an actor that you start looking at and going, wow, that's fascinating, and you grab onto it. Is there a movie that maybe a lot of people don't pay attention to that you say like, wow, that inspires me to no end as an actor?
There are actually a lot of those. I wish I had had time to think about that because there are a lot of those. There are a lot of movies that I find like What's Eating Gilbert Grape is that movie just slays me. I mean, it just slays me. And I can't watch that movie casually, like with it being on the TV while doing other things, because it's important feeling, like it matters to me that these people be okay. And I care about that family. Like I genuinely, deeply care about that family, and they're fictional. So,
right.
But that movie reminds me of Faulkner, and Faulkner's one of my favorite authors. So, it's coming off of that thing of like that. I like that kind of storytelling, and I love richly detailed characters. And if you haven't seen that movie, I feel like whether you like Johnny Depp or Leo DiCaprio or Juliette Lewis, or whether you,
which you should like at least one of those.
One of those. I mean, what are you, crazy?
Juliette Lewis alone. I mean, yeah, it's. So, I mean, no.
Yeah. So that would be one that, I think a lot of people though now, because Leo is, at the time Leo was just a kid and nobody knew what he was going to become, although we all knew what he was become that watched that movie. But and had seen This Boy's Life before that. I mean, so but small movies like that, I mean, that, that director's previous movie was My Life as a Dog, and it was in Swedish with subtitles. So, at the time that movie was kind of a sleeper. And I have a bunch of those where I just really, fell in love with something that other people kind of were glossing over at the time, or that had a moment and that moment faded. But I think the thing that I'm most surprised by now and want to kind of give voice to is that there's a bunch of movies that I thought everybody had watched that young people have not seen. Why? It shocks me that not every female in the movie-going world has seen Terminators 1 and 2. Terminators 1 and 2 are like the most important feminist movies.
Most female empowerment movies ever, yeah.
Why do young women not know about them? And I guess things like that, where where they're movies that are not necessarily unsung. They could have been huge hits. But like by the same token, why does every female filmmaker not seen Point Break? Point Break rocks. That is one of the best B movies ever made. And it happens to have been directed by a female.
Yeah, Catherine Bigelow directs.
Yeah.
I mean, she directs the best male action movies ever. And she's, I mean, Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30. I mean, I watched that. I literally watched Zero Dark 30 and then rewound Zero Dark 30 to the beginning and watched it straight through again because I was blown away by the filmmaking of that movie.
I've done that in movie theaters where you go out the exit door, buy
you're like, one more ticket, please. And then, but it was amazing. And again, it was a movie where you're like, you're sitting there going like, oh, who directed this? And it's like, it's Catherine Bigelow. Like how did a woman direct this military movie? Like you don't even think about it. And you're like, I want nothing but this. Like she should direct all of the movies, like it's amazing.
Right. That thing happens a lot now. Like for example, young men, I said to you earlier, Breaking Away. Why hasn't every young man seen Breaking Away? It's a coming
add it to my list
movie. You haven't seen it. I give you this gift. Go see Breaking Away. It is a genius movie. Dennis Christopher is one of the most beautiful human beings as a person, but as an actor, he's extraordinary. And he is so good in that movie. He's so good in that movie. And the cast includes, it's like, and introducing Daniel Stern, the guy, what's his name from Watchmen? The movie, not the show. With the three names, the shorter guy. Yeah, him. And Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid is like a young hottie with a six pack, and he's like the Brad Pitt of that time. And I mean, it is a great
Jackie Earle Haley, the amazing actor. Yeah.
Yes, he's amazing. So it's that cast, and they're not even like the parents were the ones that got all the nominations and stuff. So it's an extraordinarily well done movie made during the 70s, during that independent era. And every inch of that feel, but at the same time, it's a family film that you can watch. I watched it as a kid, so I don't know how do guys miss Breaking Away and Fandango? There's a company called Fandango that we all have that app, and yet nobody knows that's a movie. Go see Fandango. It's Kevin Costner, Judd Nelson. It's another one of those four guys on a road trip. And it's a funny movie. and poignant. So, I guess I get surprised by how many movies that, like American Graffiti.
They just get lost in the flow of streaming movie, but that's why I love these conversations and that's why I called it Film School, is because I think some of the best film school is watching these movies. Cause you hear, like, you have a Tarantino because he watched these biker movies in the 70s. He watched these crazy samurai, and so it's fascinating hearing. And I love, now I have these movies I can go watch from you saying, okay, I'm going to understand, first of all, I'm going to understand Laura better, and I'm going to understand what she's bringing to the table more. But I'm also going to know, there's this movie that I've never heard of that inspired an entire wave of filmmakers, and I'm going to deeply appreciate their projects. I think that's really powerful. And that's why I love these conversations, because that's what I want people who are 21 sitting there and watching, watch the Spider-Man No Way Home, but also go back and watch, go watch the movies that inspired those filmmakers. Watch Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, go watch Evil Dead that Sam Raimi made for $3,000 in a cabin, do your film history and learn, watch what they started with. I think that's, even beyond that, watch Three Stooges and see how much that influenced Sam Raimi.
It's the number one thing I tell actors is if you're starting out, and you want to get an idea of how to do that, how to be a actor starting out, go watch everybody's first role. Yeah. Richard Dreyfuss's first role was, I don't know if it was his first role ever, but his first movie role that I'm aware of, he was in The Graduate, which, by the way, if you haven't seen The Graduate, what are you doing? Go see The Graduate. What are you doing? See The Graduate. It's important. It changed things. It was the Reservoir Dogs of its time. It shocked the nation,
It literally inspired Jackie Brown's opening scene.
So yes. Wait, now where was I?
Watch The Graduate. But you were talking about watching the first role.
The one-liner. He says, you want me to call the cops? I'll go call the cops. That's his line. And so you can see how Richard handles his little one-liner, and Norman Fell has a small part, and that's in the same scene. And, all these people who ended up having these giant careers had these little smart parts in that movie. Well, that happens over and over. Or you can watch an ensemble of people just starting out, like Dazed and Confused, American Graffiti. These were ensembles of people just starting out. They're Can't Buy Me. No, not Can't Buy Me. There's another one that was in the 90s one that was with, the Ghost Whisperer, Jennifer Love Hewitt. And it had a cast of thousands, and a bunch of them went on. And then there's another one and another one and another one. They're all these ensemble cast movies that launched 1,000 faces. So those are all important to see. Go see them all. There's a reason Dazed and Confused launched a bunch of careers.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that was when I crossed off my list just beginning of this year, and I was like, or end of last year. And I was like, oh, I get it. I get why these people are all household names now. It's unreal.
Well, and then another thing that director can teach you is what it means to not just love movies, but have faith in them. Because when he made that movie about the boy growing up, and he dedicated 12 years of his life to a movie, not knowing, he doesn't know on day one whether all of the people he's cast will even be alive in 12 years. Yeah.
It's crazy.
He took that leap of faith, and that movie to me is a love story between that director and movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy risk for sure. Well, okay. I think for sure I need to get you on a part 2 because yes. I would love to chat with you some more. But I love the call to action at the end. And I think, I could see you and Tarantino have some interesting conversations about film history. I understand. I'm getting to see why there's such a connection there.
And just so you know, there's a little list at the end of my book. There's a little list of all the books that are mentioned. I mean, all the movies that are mentioned within the book. Now, not all of those movies are movies that I think you should race right out and see. However, many of the movies that we've mentioned, and many of the movies that I do believe are sort of critical to having a conversation with anybody in our industry are on that list.
Yeah.
You know, if you love Tarantino, you're not going to have a fun time talking to him if you don't know what the heck he's talking about.
Right.
He's going to throw movie reference after movie reference after movie reference at you. So, if you want to have a conversation with that guy, bend your knees, get ready.
That's on the bucket list for me. And I've done the work. I watched C.C. Ryder in preparation for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I mean, which I'm sure you're very familiar with Hellride. Probably had to watch that. I was required watching. But yeah, I love the call to action to watch more movies. That's really it's just baseline. Like that's baseline homework. It's foundational.
How you prove your love.
But
how can you say I love movies if you don't
haven't seen any?
know them?
Right.
Yeah. That's like saying I love a person you have a crush on who's never met you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you have to dive into this. You have to really love it if you want to be a part of it. I mean, Quentin was already such an aficionado before he ever did rolled 1 inch of film. He had already seen a zillion films. I had too. I think a lot of the people that I run with come from that school of, we love movies for real. We're not kidding,
Yeah. It's not just a day job thing. It's a passion. And I definitely, if anybody's listening to this, I mean, step one, I mean, No Small Parts is a fantastic book, and I'm not just saying, I wouldn't say anything about it. It's a great book. And it's not something I have to awkwardly say like, oh, check it out. Maybe it's really good, really interesting. Even if you're not an actor, I mean,
and it is endorsed by Kevin Costner and Richard Dreyfuss and Reggie Hudlin. And
I'm sure people may have heard of those
Phillips
people,
and,
it's a great book just to get a look behind the industry. Like, even if you're not acting, I mean, the anecdotes are invaluable, and the movie recommendations. I mean, there's a long list of homework you can take and do, but thank you. I mean, thank you so much for, one, contributing to movies that we love, but also writing so extensively, sharing a peek behind the curtain, and, really leaving behind nuggets that the next generation of filmmakers, actors, producers, writers, directors can look at and, glean from. I think it's invaluable. And, I really appreciate it.
I hope so. I really put my back into that book. I really have tried to be as truthful as possible and give as much information as possible because I basically was trying to write the book that I had always been looking for when I was back in those library days, looking at books and books and books and books. The book I was really looking for was one that would quit being so vague and talking in such surreptitious terms and just tell me, how do you do this? How do you do this? What's the lifestyle going to be like? How do I maintain it? Everything from like, when do I join the union to how do I get a free dress for the red carpet? And that's the book I wrote and continue to update. So it's phenomenal.
And so thank you. And thank you for doing this interview. I mean, letting me
you're very
dive a little bit deeper. It means a lot to me. And I certainly hope it's not the last time that we talk. And it was really valuable to me.
Well, I've very much enjoyed this conversation and not for the least of which reasons is that you ask unusual questions. I do this kind of thing enough that there's a sort of group of questions, like a word cluster that are just the questions you get over and over. And you have questions that really put me to the test. So I really appreciate that you made me think.
Yeah, that means the world to me. Thank you so much. And seriously, everybody go pick up a copy of that book. And like I said, hopefully we'll have this conversation again sometime soon. Ask some more unusual questions.
Wonderful. I look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Film School podcast. If you appreciated the content on the show, don't forget to leave a 5-star review and hit subscribe so you won't miss a single episode.